My name is Sita Kumar and I'm the CEO of ScreenSkills. I'm delighted to introduce Jane Root, an industry legend known for her creativity, passion, and ambition. I feel privileged to have known Jane when I was a program maker at the BBC, and I was also fortunate to have experienced her kindness and support. We're delighted so many of you have joined us today. This session is part of a ScreenSkills program to support freelancers to upskill and stay connected, helping keep our industry resilient in these really difficult times. The program is supported by the ScreenSkills Television Skills Fund, which invests in training for the freelance television workforce, thanks to contributions from the BBC, Channel 4, and Channel 5. We hope you enjoy the session. Please remember, there are more bookable sessions that will be uploaded onto the ScreenSkills website in the coming days and weeks. In a moment, I'll hand you over to Liz Tucker, Chair of Women Film and TV, who is moderating today's session.
Well, I think Jane absolutely defines the world trailblazer. As Sita said, she's done so much in her career, including becoming the first female controller at the BBC, where she ran BBC Two, and later becoming president of Discovery Networks in the US, and also founding two hugely successful indies. First of all, of course, Waterwall, and then more recently, Nutopia. So Jane, what was it that drove you to start your first indie, Wall to Wall?
Waterwall kind of emerged, we were making a program. We were making a show called The Media Show, which I kind of got into. I was a researcher and I'd done journalism at the London College of Printing, and I found myself this wonderful job as working a researcher on a TV show. And we made a series called Open the Box, and then we made a series called The Media Show. And it was only planned to be like 6 programs. And Channel 4, who were a very new broadcaster then, said, we'd like this to be a weekly, first of all, fortnightly and then weekly show. And we were like, well, we better start a company in order to do it. And we didn't. So it wasn't like we're going to start a company and it's going to be still running decades later. It just kind of emerged out of our passion for the show we were making.
And then moving on to Wall to Wall, you became the first female controller of BBC Two. That must have been quite a culture change from having run an indie.
I had this thing when I was at Wall to Wall, which is I'd never worked anywhere at all except for kind of myself as a freelance, unless you count British Home Stores on Saturdays. And I kind of felt like, I felt very envious of all the people, all these things that people knew about that I didn't know, like schedules and audiences and research. And I just had this kind of idea that I wanted to know what these things other people were doing. And I remember somebody, George Carey, who started another early independent company, saying to me, oh, you can't count yourself as a television person unless you've worked for the BBC. And I kind of took that seriously. And we were at a moment at Wall to Wall where I just felt like, oh, maybe I could do something different. And the BBC had been trying to lure me to go there for a long time. And then one day I just suddenly said, yeah, I'll do it. And I went. Not to do BBC Two to start with. I did an interim job, which was called the Independent Commissioning Group, where we tried to get the BBC to really open the door to independence, which was just kind of, the crack was just opening. That was my job for 18 months, and then I did BBC Two. But I love the BBC. It was kind of, it was, and still is, I think, from friends of mine who still work there, it's an extraordinary place. I think it's a unique in the world. It can be frustrating, but it's also kind of deeply wonderful, is my feeling about it.
So would you ever be tempted to go back?
I don't think so. I'm kind of like, apart from anything, I've lived in America now for 15 years, and I'm kind of an American. I'm calling you from my basement at 6:30 in the morning. Because
I know you very kindly got up really early for us. Yeah. And of course, you run Nutopia largely from the States now. So you started Wall, you'd worked at the BBC, you were the president of Discovery Networks in the US. So what tempted you to set up a second indie?
I just felt there was an opportunity to do things in a different way, really. The big founding moment for me about Utopia was that I've been involved with lots of natural history at the BBC and sort of watched BBC kind of watch natural history develop. Then I went to Discovery, and suddenly it was really, we made natural history into a really big success, but there wasn't enough of it. And people, advertisers and other supporters of what we were doing at Discovery really wanted more big programs, and we found it really hard to find them. And so I was like, oh, that's something, there's not enough real things of scale. And so when Utopia kind of began, that was really the founding idea of it. Let's try and do things that are really, really difficult, which people still laugh at me at Utopia about.
I think you sort of dubbed it the Mega Dog.
Yeah, I think our first program was this 12-hour history of America made in a year. Should have taken about 5 years, but we did it in a year. And it had drama documentaries shot all over the world, and it's introduced by Barack Obama. And we were like, yep, we can do these huge things. And we called them megadocs to just try and differentiate them from more reasonably, sensibly sized documentaries.
So Jane, how do you get somebody like Barack Obama to agree to take part in a series like that?
You start a process. It was done very much by the History Channel as well as by us. You start a process, and we had a lot of great historian experts. The wonderful thing about, I think one might just draw a distinction between that president and our current president.
Really?
Very concerned. Barack Obama was very concerned about history and very concerned to learn the lessons of past presidents, and had occasional evening dinners with historians at the White House. And through that, some of those historians were also our consultants. And I think the process emerged of History Channel making the request, them checking out the historians, and kind of went from there. We also by that point already had a kind of roll call of America's most famous historians and public figures, people like Colin Powell, we'd already interviewed. So that there was a sense that it wasn't crazy to have him there.
So Jane, that went on to be a hugely successful show for you.
Yeah, I mean, America's Story of Us kind of started a lot of things. We ended up collaborating with other independents and making Canada the story of us, Australia the story of us, and we're still right now talking to people about making China the story of us all those years later. So yeah, it was a sort of one of those groundbreaking moments that it was so fast. We were making it was crazy fast. And we shot the drama documentary in South Africa, which was also kind of a big breakthrough for us as a company, realizing that we could get real kind of feature film quality drama documentary by shooting in other places in the world, which was also really exciting.
And this concept of the megadoc you went on to develop on a number of shows, including The World According to Jeff Goldblum. Again, another example of getting a really great A-lister. What was the approach to getting Jeff on board?
Well, we have a wonderful team member, Lynn Kirby, who works in Los Angeles. I've worked on and off for Lynn since, for God knows how many years. We knew each other before either of us worked in television. We were both affiliated with the various film institutes as kind of freelancers and researchers. And we knew the agent, Jeff's agent, because we spend a lot of time working on our connections with those kind of people. And Jeff, I think, knew some of the things that we'd done with other people, like with Will Smith. And Jeff's agent was like, we started a conversation with us. And so it kind of emerged from there. And then we spent a lot of time, Jeff Goldblum is like, it's kind of like the inverse of America's Story of Us is all very serious and important and grand. World According to Jeff Goldblum is about things like swimming and toothbrushes, and we're just making one about fireworks in the second series. So, but it's so it's a kind of meditation on the small and unique and the world filtered through one strange and wonderful person's view of the world. I mean, and Jeff Goldblum, the good news I can tell you is that Jeff Goldblum is as wonderful in real life as he is, you know, you might imagine. Sometimes you have a fear. I think I certainly do, is that kind of as just a fan. I remember watching The Fly and those movies as a teenager, I suppose, and thinking, oh my God, it's Jeff Goldblum. And then you meet him and he turns out to be just as lovely and funny and wonderful as you might imagine. He joined our team Zoom meeting on Friday. He bombed and just turned up in our company Zoom meeting to kind of cheer everybody up. He's really, and it sometimes with these Hollywood people, you get behind the layers and layers of people they have employed to protect them, and they're just like, it's like normal, sweet people. That's been our experience up till now. I'm sure there are other experiences, but we've never had one.
Yeah, I'm interested that you said that you spend a lot of time in developing these connections. I think that's probably not true of all factual companies who would perhaps spend so much time developing those sort of connections with people like Goldblum.
We have a kind of, I know it's one of the things we should talk about. We have a pretty unique approach to development within Utopia. Simon Morgos and Sam Fernandez, who run that department. We don't develop many actual projects, and we kind of pride ourselves that almost everything that we develop really seriously with Sal. And so we spend a lot of time developing connections with people and figuring out who we might like to work with as customers and as collaborators. And so, yeah, we didn't target Jeff Goldblum, but we knew that we were interested in a small number of kind of smart, funny, engaging figures like him, and that we were looking for opportunities to work with the right people.
So Jane, on a show like that, how much input does Jeff have into shaping the concept?
There's lots of talking to Jeff. I think the concept more comes from the team, but Jeff loves to hear ideas, and then he'll have things that work for him and connect with him. And there's a lot of chatter, I think, is the best way to describe it, back and forward. But the coming up with the idea, but the shape of it is something which comes from Utopia.
I was interested, you just touched on how your development strategy is quite different to a lot of companies in the fact that you don't develop many projects, and you're putting your resources actually into the shows that you want to make happen.
I'm kind of like, I suppose, having been a broadcaster for 10 years and been on the other end of people's pitches, you kind of get to, I got a feeling of what worked for me as a buyer. And what worked for me as a buyer was shows that people really, really believed in, and they knew the essence of it. It's not so much about writing loads of stuff down. I'm not a big fan of writing huge documents until you have to. I say that knowing that for Utopia, we spent the whole weekend writing a script for something. 33 pages and counting. But most of the time, it's about the purity of the idea and lots and lots of thinking. And then and then really believing in it. And I really hate that thing of like, have 100 ideas and see what sticks to the wall. I mean, most of the ideas that we have, we really believe in, and we really kind of test them and talk about them endlessly and push them around. And then by the time we talk to anyone at a broadcaster about it, we really know what we want to do.
So by the time we're talking to a broadcaster, how developed are those ideas?
Well, the American system and most of our customers are global or American. Most of our customers want the American system of pitching, which means that you go and pitch maybe to 4 or 5 people four or five customers in a couple of days. You have a sizzle, like one of those ones that we've just shown. You'll have a budget, you'll have a plan, and you go in and you'll be able to pitch it for but, you know, 5 or 6 minutes as a pretty much, if you buy this thing, this is what you'll get. Like really kind of a vision of what a show would be. And that's different to the British system, which is much more about going and have a chat and then go and have another chat and then maybe write something and have another chat. The American system is much more immediate. It can be a bit intimidating, but it's also a bit more democratic, and it's fast. It means that you can go and pitch a show, and these days doing it by Zoom, we pitch by Zoom rather than in person. You can do it in an hour, and they have to decide.
When you say more democratic, but presumably, obviously, someone like you is in a position to pick up the phone to any broadcaster, really. Some British companies sort of find it quite difficult to get in front of certain American broadcasters.
It takes you a long time to get in. It took us I meant democratic in terms of using Zoom rather than the actual trip there. It takes you a long time to get in, and they're kind of guardians of their own time, and they don't have any need. You know, a British public service broadcaster has a need to prove that they're working with lots and lots of different people. It's part of their remit. It's not the same for a Disney or an HBO. They don't have any necessity for working with lots of different people. So you have to find your way in and make them feel that you get their way of working. I think that's the big thing. And if you get their way of working, then they're pretty receptive, because they have this very come in and pitch kind of mentality. You don't, but they're actually, once you kind of get through the first few tiers of hurdles, I find them pretty open to pitches, because it only takes half an hour. And if they hate it, then, you know, it's not like they're investing a huge amount of their effort and energy in it.
But you've invested a lot of your energy and effort in getting those ideas to that level. If you've only got a small pool of ideas that you believe in.
Yeah, we just kind of, I think it's surprising to some people who come and first work at Utopia that we're very selective about what we do, and what we spend a lot of money. We invest enormously as a company in development. I think really, really a lot of money. It's our biggest thing that we do, and we believe in them. And there's obviously things that fall by the wayside, and things that don't work, and things that, you know, you feel like, are we really sure? But I think we have about an 80% success rate with things.
That's pretty impressive. That's right. So how do you prepare for one of these pitches?
Rehearse. We do lots and lots of rehearsing. You know, we're like, okay, I'm going to say this, and you're going to say that, and this is what we're going to show, and this is what we're going to talk about, and this is the essence of the idea. Americans are big on what they call the elevator pitch. If you were stuck with Bob Iger in an elevator going up 10 floors, how would you describe your show in one sentence or two sentences? And we really work on what's the core of the idea, back and forth. And then what's the examples, what's the images of it, how would it look, how would it feel? We did a Zoom pitch to Netflix last week, and we had a tape, and and 3 of us from Utopia talked, but we were very worked out what we were saying. We really kind of...
You've sat in a room and one of your colleagues has played the commissioners and things before you ever go into a pitch.
Say that again.
Sorry, I was going to say, so you've gone through a full rehearsal at Nutopia. Effectively, one of your colleagues plays the role of the commissioner, and you have kind of worked out exactly what you're going to say.
Many rehearsals, not just one. Yeah, we keep working, but then we try and make it, but then it's like a play. You work it and work it and work it, but then at the end you try and make it very informal, and so you just happen to have had this intensely worked out idea in your back pocket, and then we try and make it enjoyable and relaxed, and we preempt the questions they will have. I mean, it's really good, you know, that with Netflix last week, the first question was one we would say to ourselves, so what are they going to ask? And they absolutely asked the first question. And
what was the first question they were going to ask?
How the hell will you make this in the time of virus?
Thank you to everybody for your questions that are coming through. We'll be going to the questions at the end of the session, and do keep your questions coming through. Thank you. Jen, what happens when you're in a meeting and your pitch isn't working out quite as you'd hoped? What do you do?
You pivot, you change. And that you kind of, you're trying to both pitch what you went in with, but then you change. And sometimes, sometimes the dreadful thing will happen where they'll all look at each other and go, we really love this idea. We love it so much. We just bought it from somebody else. And then you have to you either go, okay, we'll regroup. But sometimes there's actually, you get a sense that their trajectory is slightly at odds with what you were saying, and then you try really hard to both listen and think at the same time. I mean, Netflix last week, it was clear that, and there were 3 people in the meeting with 3 slightly different agendas, which is also a pretty common thing. It was clear that one person wanted more depth and complexity and in the idea that we were originally pitching, but we'd thought a lot about that, and so we were able to kind of pivot and talk about her, what she was interested in.
Now, you, I think, were one of the first companies to be commissioned by SVoDs such as Netflix. How did that sort of fit into the strategy about what you wanted to do with Nutopia and where you wanted to take the company?
I felt like we created Utopia before SVoDs happened, but it was kind of what we were waiting to happen. So America's Story of Us was on a network that has, 5 ad breaks per hour. It's what I've been used to from Discovery. And it's very hard to make those huge shows, which aren't obviously advertiser friendly, for cable networks that depend in that kind of way. So when the SVoDs came along, we knew that the kind of programming we make was going to work for them. That it was a matter of making the relationships, but that the idea of an intense, beautiful kind of my mantra right from BBC Two days has always been clever pleasure. Make things clever and thoughtful, but also really enjoyable. We knew that would have a home with the SVoDs, and then we just had to winkle our way in there and make the relationships.
And doing it on scale as well.
Yeah, but one of the things about scale, I knew when I was at BBC Two, I did a piece of research which has stayed with me forever, where we looked at the number of commissionable programs that we were offered as a network. This was things that other people in the organization thought were worthy of a BBC Two primetime slot compared to the number of hours that we had. And things like single documentaries, we probably had room for like 5 or 6 of them a year, and we probably got offered 300. So, and they were all great. That was by amazing filmmakers with wonderful ideas. And so the chances of being successful on BBC Two with a single documentary were really tiny. Really big network defining events that would get, in those days, a billboard off of BBC Two and be talked about by the whole country, we were offered almost none. And most of them that we did during that time, we thought of as a team ourselves. So we knew that was the place to aim, that we were aiming at a place where we had few competitors. And that has always been, right from the start, a kind of the ethos of Utopia.
So Jane, you've taken a subject, babies, and really reinvented it for Netflix.
Well, babies, I did a show when I was at Waterwall called Baby It's You, which was, I think, one of the first shows about babies ever done really on primetime TV. And we, like, in a sort of serious way. And I'd always loved the idea of doing babies. I got to be a mother late in life, but I'd always had the passion for babies and children. And what babies is a really good example of something that's built for an SVoD, because it's, as anybody who's a parent knows, there's basically a year of your life when you are absolutely obsessed by babies. And then, life moves on, and the idea that you ever spent that much time completely obsessing about milk and sleeping, you can't even remember that it was. And so there's millions of people across the world in that stage of being obsessed, but not all at the same time. It happens to everybody at different moments. And so an SVoD where you can access that material at the point in your life when you want it, rather than just when the network decides that you should want it. It's built for an SVoD. And so the moment that Netflix really started commissioning, it was one of the very first things that we took to them, and they got it immediately. It was one of those rare moments where we were in Netflix's old building in LA, and we went outside the room, and the meeting went on so long. There were all these people waiting for the next meeting in the meeting room outside, and somebody said to us, okay, we want it, how much? And I hadn't prepared a budget, which was a lesson to me. And so I made a figure up in the corridor, which was a really bad idea. But it was a show built for SVoDs, and the fact that every day in the world someone is, every minute someone is having a baby. That was important. But it's also what the show has evolved in, that there's no narration, and the heroes of it are the scientists, 90% of whom are women, talking about the science behind babies.
From an industry perspective, what do you think are the differences between working for an SVoD and a traditional broadcaster?
The big thing that is that they expect you to do it. They expect you to take hold of every aspect of it. They want to have very high level meetings. Some are more involved than others. But I think the biggest difference is not so much between SVoDs and classic broadcasters, it's between British and Americans. When I went to Discovery, I did some work looking at the number of hours that an average Channel 4 producer, commissioner looked after, and the average hours a commissioner on my team looked after. In Britain, it was about 30 hours. In my team, the team I'd inherited, it was about 120. And I think that fact tells you everything, that they don't expect to be as involved. They expect you as a broadcast, as an independent, to get it and make it work and deliver it. And if there's problems, then you've got to sort them out. There is no such thing as a broadcaster funded overspend in America. It's down to you. And if you make a mistake with that figure that you quote in the corridor, it's your fault.
But so in a sense, you also have more creative control, because there's just less kind of people to manage that number of hours.
Yes, you have more creative control, but you need to be clearer at the start. It's less of that back and forward, a bit more of this, a bit less of that. You go in with an idea that you can imagine on screen. You go in and you're like, this is what we want to do. And often you're going in and having that conversation with 4 or 5 different potential customers. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you get to choose who you want to be the buyer and who matches your concept most closely. Obviously, you're mostly going for the biggest financial offer, but not always. Sometimes you're going with the person that you want to make the show for.
So what would be your advice for indies trying to develop relationships with SVoDs such as Netflix and Amazon?
To be really clear about what's special about you as a company, what you're offering, and to refine the idea so it's really super clear. And don't give up. Just keep. In the end, they depend on people giving them ideas, and so you have to just keep going. I'm kind of, I think, to the exhaustion of people that I work with at Utopia, I'm very much a never give up person. It's there are shows that we sold at Nutopia and at Waterwall that we developed for more than 10 years. And I had an idea, or somebody else had an idea, and we just kept going. And things change. We had the idea for babies before Netflix was buying shows, and we tried to sell it to all of the traditional broadcasters, and for the reasons I've explained, nobody wanted to buy it. And then Netflix came along and we sold it. So yeah, don't give up.
So obviously the SVoDs have had a huge impact on the TV landscape. If you had to sort of gaze into the crystal ball for the future, what do you think is likely to be the next big sort of shift in television?
Well, I think you're seeing it more and more with people watching things, where people watch things. You know, I think we still watch things on big TVs with our families, but I have a 15-year-old who spends her life on her phone, but watches an enormous amount of what she enjoys on her phone. And that has to be a really big thing. That she also watches it in groups. You know, she watches her favorite Netflix shows, some of which are very old shows, interestingly, with her friends, particularly now. And that sense of communal viewing, maybe with 50 people from your high school, and things also that we watch in different times and different ways. It's kind of wonderful that on Netflix, generations who weren't even born when some of these shows were made discovered them new. Like The Office and Friends are regarded by my daughter's generation as their shows, which is kind of wonderful.
It's amazing, isn't it? You touched on some of the differences between working in the US and the UK, but I suppose one of the other big differences is the much bigger part that agents seem to play in the US at the development stage.
We're lucky, and we have an agent who we really adore. You know, he's completely a partner in Utopia, and if a couple of days go by that I haven't spoken to him, I'll be texting him and sort of saying, "Are you okay? Is anything happening? You know, what's going on?" But he's our eyes and ears with the community. He's also him and the other people that he works with are very, you know, tough with us about this little sizzle. I don't know what it is. I don't understand it. You know, there's a kind of a phrase that we hear where they say, "It's a great show, but what is it?" And we're like, we've kind of learned to say, what would Alan say about any new sizzle that we make, and try and make it clear what the thing is. Because it's so easy to get so involved in a show that you lose track of who it's for and what it is.
You get sort of obsessed with the detail because you almost know too much about it.
Yeah, and it feels obvious to you. I read this treatment that we've been working on over the weekend. I read it and I said, these sections that we're filming, is that documentary filming, or is it an exercise, or is it archive? And everyone was like, obviously. And I hadn't read it for a few days, and I'd lost track of really vital thing that that people who were going to understand it needed to know. So you need an agent like that. I mean, I spent years thinking, why on earth would we need an agent? And I'm now the biggest convert to it.
So what would be your advice for companies looking to develop that relationship with an agent?
Well, it does cost you money, obviously. It's not free by any means. But you think about whether you're really aiming at the American market or the British market. I think that's probably the first decision you have to make. You know, agents are quite peripheral people in selling to British broadcasters. I don't think I ever really had meetings with agents at all, except occasionally when I was buying finished programs when I was at BBC Two, and to a degree at Discovery, but now all the time. So you have to decide. I mean, I think not just about agents, but about everything. I'm a really big believer in know what you're trying to achieve and single-mindedly set out in that. And that's harder when you're a new company, because it feels like, oh my God, I ought to spread my bets. I ought to be doing lots of different things. But if you know what kind of program, what kind of customer, what country you're aiming at, and then say, what do I need to help me achieve that? And if you're aiming for certain kind of LA-based SVoDs, you probably need an agent. If you're aiming to sell to Channel 4 or the BBC, you don't.
But do you think British companies in the US sometimes underplay the values of having an agent?
For us, that was the case. Yeah, we underplayed it, and then when we did it, it was worth it.
And there really is knowledge there that you can leverage if you use your agent in the right way.
I think if you have the right relationship. I don't know that everybody does. I think we're we're unique, and I don't know, we're unique. We feel that what we do is our relationship feels unique to us. But I think other people, I mean, I know our agents, although they try and pretend that we're the only clients. So, and I suspect they make everybody feel that way.
Of course, you having been both a buyer as well as a seller, I'm assuming changes your perspective and does help you sort of think how the broadcaster is thinking when you're pitching to them.
I think that's really important, and I think that's a big role a part of my role in Utopia is to be, where does this fit in? And that applies to both things you're selling and shows you're making. You know, where does this fit into the broadcaster? What are they experiencing? What are they making? What are the pressures on them? I think it's very easy when you're an independent to feel like we have all this incredible pressure on us, and life is easy for a broadcaster. And that's not the case. You know, working for a broadcaster is pretty damn tough too. And so if you can figure out what their problems are and preempt them and figure out, you know, what they're trying to do and what their challenges are, who their customers are. I mean, one of the big things that's different about SVoDs to traditional cable broadcasters is who their customers are. You know, SVoDs are selling direct to consumers who have to pay their subscription fee, and making them happy is really, that's how their business works. A cable company is essentially selling audiences to advertisers, and they have to do that additional step. And so you have to bear that in mind too.
So there's a difference between the best idea as opposed to the best idea for the broadcaster's needs.
When you're a broadcaster, you're looking for your customers, your audiences want. When I was at BBC Two, I had a sort of jousting friendship, kind of frenemies with Channel 4, and we would make shows on BBC Two which we really believed in and they wouldn't work, and Channel 4 would do the same, and our joke was always if we could just swap programs, they'd all be successful. Because I was sometimes commissioning, I couldn't find a Channel 4 audience for my BBC Two programs, and it was the same for them. So you have to really think through who your customers are and why they might want your show.
Frustratingly, in the UK at least, while there are plenty of women at senior levels within broadcasters now, it's still rare to have women running their own indies. Do you have any theories about why that is?
I don't know. I've done it twice. I really enjoy it. I think it's great. It's kind of, to me, it's so enjoyable. It's, you know, like you get to have ideas, you get to work with great people, you get to spend your time, you know, thinking about what's next and what's interesting. I really don't know. I think the combination of different things you have to do, from ideas to working with people to, you know, talking to customers, they seem to me things that women are all very good at.
It's strange, isn't it? Because you can see there's been a real sea change in the number of women in senior, certainly within the UK, within our senior terrestrial broadcasters. But it's, you know, it is still puzzling that it's still relatively rare outside of the broadcasters.
Yeah, hey, do it. If you're watching this and you're thinking of doing it, do your research, but do it.
Jane, one of your colleagues said one of your favourite questions when you're looking to hire people is asking what someone's superpower is. So I wondered if I could turn the tables and ask you what you think your superpower is.
I'm very good at cooking while I'm also thinking about a program idea. Our agents, because they're in LA, are always they're always saying, "So what are you cooking now?" And I'm like, "I'm making, you know, Caesar salad with fresh croutons." They're like, "Okay, good. Now we want to ask you about this." So I like to cook, and it involves a lot of clattering. I'm sorry for people who hear it, but like, yeah, my superpower is cooking and thinking of an idea at the same time.
You've achieved so much. You've obviously operated at a very high level within broadcasters, also 2 highly successful super indies. So is there any sort of particular goal or ambition left that you still want to achieve in TV?
Before you said TV, I was about to start talking about some of the recipes I'm planning on for this week, but I haven't ever really successfully made bread.
Have you tried soda bread?
Yeah, work in progress. Work in progress. In TV, I just think we want to. I think there's a whole interesting thing going on about drama documentary becoming more and more like classic drama, and I think that's interesting. When I was both at Waterwall and at the BBC, I did a lot. I was involved in a lot of scripted, lots of drama work, but we haven't done that at Utopia. So that's kind of interesting next frontier, but not this year. But you know, there's lots of frontiers of new kind of things that we'd like to do, but we try to not take on too many things at once.
So we've just got some questions coming in, Jane. One of the questions was, you talked about having to explain how to make things in the time of Corona. What's your advice and the sort of things that the companies need to think about during this time?
Well, we're making a lot. We have a whole working group run with people from throughout the company, figuring out how to film remotely, how to do archive remotely, and so we're doing a ton of stuff. I mean, Zoom is your friend, and we kind of, you know, I'm in the unique position in that I always worked remotely. I was always here in America, and most of Utopia was in London, so working remotely is not that much of a surprise for me. I'm quite happy to not have the early morning trains to New York or flights to London, but working remotely, it's all about talking to each other, you know, and I think I think Zoom has offered lots and lots of potential for people to connect together all the time. And that's an exciting thing. I mean, I'm a kind of relentless optimist. I think it comes from my family. And I'm like, wow, we're learning all these new things, and we've got all these new skills, and we can have, you know, 100 people Zooms, which we do at Nutopia, and we can do all this stuff. So I think it's just never giving up, being optimistic, and always feeling that you're learning and you're learning new things. We're learning so much from this experience.
So can you talk a bit more about perhaps some of the kind of remote kind of filming approaches that you're using?
We're just if you ask me this in 3 weeks' time, we might be better off. We're looking at, in fact, most of today, I'm going to be exploring that. We're looking at iPhones. We're looking at delivering equipment to people. We're also doing both a short term, the next month, a 3 months plan, and then a 6 months plan. So we've got 3 different levels that we're looking at within the company about how we're going to have to respond to this crisis, because it's our belief that it's not all going to be solved in a few weeks. So we're looking at, as with a lot of things, it's a meeting of technology and editorial ideas, bringing the two of them together.
Okay. Thanks, Jane. And another question: how do you adapt a pitch to different buyers, and if so, how?
A bit. You have to have the core idea, and the core idea really got to be really solid on that. I think there are different buyers have different kind of aims of who they're trying to sell to and who they're trying to talk to. So you know, somebody who is really interested in, somebody like Apple, for instance, who is really interested in a very particular kind of audience and are very concerned about their image, I would definitely emphasize the things that felt Apple-like with a show. Other people who are interested in, there's a question in American business, which is, what does success look like? And you have to know that for anyone you're selling to, and the answer is always different for different people. I mean, some people are very concerned about winning awards. Other people just want loads and loads and loads of people to watch. So, and you have to figure out where you fit into that. And that's slightly different for different broadcasters.
And do you take pitches from freelancers?
Occasionally, but we on the whole, because we try and be so determined about the shows that we do, we work on remarkably few shows at a time. I mean, I've talked to other friends running other companies. I think our list of things that we're actively working on is tiny compared to other people. So we're probably not really we're not the ideal company to pitch to if you're a freelance.
Well, certainly the hit rate you quoted is higher than I've heard from any other indie.
Yeah, we're kind of proud of that. And we have, if the development team are on this call, they'd be like, we have a really long list of ideas that we really believe in that we haven't got round to developing because we just don't have time. And so we could not get another new idea for a year and have enough things to develop to keep us busy if that happened. And
because you're talking about the sort of scale, presumably this is all series you're talking about for the reasons that you touched on earlier. Kind of one-off ideas would always be less interesting to Nutopia.
We hardly ever make one-offs. We did one last year, which was a co-production for HBO and Channel 4, Jihadi John, which we were really proud of. But like I said, that thing of my BBC Two experience, 300 great, wonderful feature docs for every slot we had. And feature doc world, it's a wonderful world, but it's adjacent to what we do. So we're not really, other people do that brilliantly. And I'm a big consumer and fan of that as a viewer, but it's not what Utopia does as a business.
It's quite tough to make that work as a business model, I think.
Yeah, if you can sell a 12-hour returnable series which will really give you the budget and the time to do something different and surprising versus a 90-minute film that, it's I prefer the 12 hours.
Understand. So, another question here. With your history megadocs, someone was asking how important is spectacle versus the delivery of information? How do you sort of balance the two?
It's a really good question, because you're constantly trying to keep that balance. There has to be, we really believe everything that Utopia does has a really big core of ideas and information. That's just what we do. And so even like Jeff Goldblum, there's ideas in there. There's little nuggets of what we call wow facts about ice cream and denim and swimming and those things. And so those ideas are important to us, but we also, television is a visual medium. And so how you tell those ideas and spectacle and new technology, making things visual and amazing, communicating to people in a visceral kind of way, that's really important as well. You've got to zigzag back and forth between the two. That's my feeling.
Someone asked, do you have test screenings to see what sort of information your audiences retain?
Only with, not really. Sometimes people will show things to people in Utopia and stuff, but we're not really. We're kind of, I think audience testing is really great for marketing, and it's really great for when you've got a show that you've got to figure out how to sell, but not for coming up with ideas.
And who do you admire most in the current sort of industry landscape?
Well, I'm really impressed by Sister Pictures, and what they've done in scripted, I think, is amazing. Chernobyl was, to me, like, if there was ever a show that I wished I could have made, it would have been that. I just thought it was wonderful.
Yeah, and fantastic, I think.
And so I think what Jane does with Sister Pictures is incredible. I think I'm a very eclectic viewer. I like loads and loads of different things at all, and I'm kind of, I think it's about where you get energy from, really. I think there's so many great companies out there doing great stuff in all different kind of places, that I look at what A&E has done with their Surviving series, which are big serious documentaries about pop culture meeting women's issues. I think they're incredible. I think a lot of what, I think there's some amazing comedy around at the moment, thank God. We all need that. Lots and lots of different places. It would be, I didn't think about the answer to that. Later on today, it will come to me, but
Okay.
the list would be very long.
Are there any themes or stories that you think would work well in the British market, but don't work so well in the US, and vice versa?
Oh, there's loads. I mean, when I used to be, when I was at Discovery, it was a party piece explaining to people in the Discovery Channel that our people who negotiated sports rights for us also negotiated for the Chelsea Flower Show. People used to get me to tell that story because they thought it was so incredible. And then they'd sometimes say, do you think that she's lying or not? So gardening, of which I'm personally a big fan. Yeah. Don't try selling that in America, maybe globally, but that's very particular. British people love history. I love history, but it's a particular, country's history is particular to them. You know, it's not, I have a 15-year-old American daughter, and I'm always embarrassed by how little she understands about British history. She's good on American history, but she's not good on British history.
And of course, something we touched on a little bit when we were talking earlier, the main differences when you're pitching to UK versus US broadcasters.
Well, when you're pitching in Britain, it's about a long relationship, isn't it? You go in and you have a meeting and you have the germ of an idea, often together, and which kind of emerges out of the meeting, and then you go and do some work and you go back and you have another meeting, and that's a long, slow process, and you only do it with one broadcaster at a time. Whereas in America, it's perhaps in keeping with American sort of spirit, it's very immediate, and you're in selling mode, as opposed to Britain, where I think it's slower and more collaborative.
Okay. What about sort of this may be a slightly difficult one to answer, kind of collaborations that have not been so successful in terms of broadcasters, where you found it harder to work with than others, not naming any names, and reasons for that?
Broadcasters are hard to work with are under pressure themselves. I think that's the thing that I know from working in broadcasters, and people under pressure. And at the moment, the cable industry is under a lot of pressure with its advertising, its source of income just disappearing overnight. That's really hard. And broadcasters under pressure can be really hard to work with because they are themselves really, really struggling. And you have to be, and that demands you being really clear and having a real clarity about what you're trying to do, what your problems are. I'm a big believer in the really, simple emails. British people write much longer emails than Americans. And a teasing thing I have in Utopia is I say, this is a very British email. Write me an American email. Long sentences, huge paragraphs, kind of coming to the thing, like this show might be 3 weeks late, right at the end of the description as to why. Commissioner, we are having some problems with this. There is a chance our show will be 3 weeks late. I will be able to tell you if this is true or not in 1 week. And then say the reason for this is this. That kind of, that's what Americans under pressure need, and you have to just recognize the world is tough for them. Yeah.
Okay, understood. What do you think of the differences between the American and British labour force, with the American industry being more heavily unionized than the British one?
The union, that mainly applies to feature film crews and big crews, and that hasn't really ever been a big factor for us. Most of what we make, although we sell everywhere, most of what we make is with British teams. We're a British employer. The amazing thing about British teams is about inventiveness, and I think that comes from kind of where we started really talking about the BBC. It comes from the fact that two of our biggest broadcasters in Britain And 3 of our networks, our terrestrial networks, BBC One, BBC Two, and Channel 4, have a commitment to innovation. And that's a really vital part of the British culture. And it gets to every bit of British culture, in British program making. And that's something that I think is the envy of the world. And so you look at natural history, or you look at technical innovations, or you look at crazy comedy ways of doing things. That's all supported by audiences who've come to value innovation. And that comes back to the broadcasters and the financing behind them.
With the development of all these SVoDs, do you think all of them and the cable companies can survive, or that we'll see a change over the next few years?
Who knows? Who knows? I mean, I'm sure that Netflix will survive. I'm sure that Disney will survive. We're making our first programs for HBO Max. It's going to be another new competitor. They look amazing. I don't know. I don't think. I think that the speed of change and the openness of different people to consuming content in different ways. You know, I was talking about Molly, my daughter. Some people will undoubtedly end up changing what they do and changing how they deliver, or how they charge, or who they sell to. But at the moment, the amazing thing is that we're all consuming way, way more content. Even if you leave aside the virus situation at the moment, that we're all consuming in bits of our lives that we never used to consume media, and we now consume it, and do that with pleasure, a lot of it. So, you know, I used to get the early morning train to New York often, and at 6 o'clock in the mornings, and when Walking Dead was at the height of its kind of potency, and you'd walk past it, it's like 6:10 in the morning with a cup of coffee, walk down the train, and there'd be all these people watching zombies kill other people on their laptops, having gone to bed too early to watch last night's episode. And I thought, God, there would never have been people watching zombies at 6 o'clock in the morning, but here they all are. And I think that sense of us just consuming and enjoying and a whole range of different content is just going to continue.
Okay, Jim, just got 2 final questions. One, have you had mentors to advise and guide you throughout your career?
Absolutely, 100%. I think mentors are really, really important, and you seek them out and cling on to them and use them all the time. When I was talking about the moment when I left Waterwall and went to join the BBC, which was a really kind of dangerous decision. Lots of people had joined the BBC and not had a good time. And I relentlessly asked people how I should make it work for me. One piece of advice I got in particular was to make sure that my office was on the same floor of Television Centre as the channel controllers. And I insisted upon that, even though it looked like it was a very stupid, annoying thing to ask for. And it was absolutely right. And then when I started Utopia, I had Peter Bazalgette and Michael Jackson, who had been mentors to me for many, many years. Michael Jackson from the very beginning, and they both joined the board of Nutopia to help get the company going. So both of them we created the company with mentors in mind. I suppose these days probably my Hollywood agent, Alan Braun at CAA, who I was talking about, is a mentor to me in a different kind of way. But I'm notorious for, I ask people advice all the time, and I would recommend anyone to do it. Particularly, I mean, people are flattered by being asked for advice. They don't always have time to do it in great detail, but you know, ask advice until you get the answer.
And finally, over the next 5 years, how do you see Nutopia evolving and adapting?
We're definitely going to try and expand and grow. One of the things that, in fact, today we're welcoming a new executive to the company who is going to be developing more kind of factual entertainment-based shows, developing really out from where we started with Jeff Goldblum, which is a bit of a kind of lighter, more enjoyable kind of aspect to the company. That's definitely going to grow. We're continuing to do the mega docs. We're really focusing on big returnable brands. That's really big things for us. We're really interested in technology. I think we try and do lots of new things, but not do them all at once, if that makes sense.
It makes complete sense. Well, Jane, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and getting up at 6:30 in the morning to do this interview for us. We all really appreciate it.
Well,
Really,
I hope everyone is kind of washing their hands and staying safe. And the fact there's so many people doing these amazing sessions that are being organized just shows how people are really working hard to use this kind of weird and unique time to their advantage. So, you know, thanks to everyone for organizing it. Thanks to everyone for joining it. The questions were great too. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jane. Cheerio. Bye. Thank you, everybody.